There's something about the forest at night that seeps into your bones. A stillness that isn't silent. A darkness that seems to watch you. A shadow that moves just beyond the edge of your vision. People have been drawn to the woods for centuries, seeking solace, adventure, or answers. But those who wander too far, who venture where the faint light of civilization cannot reach, often return with stories that defy explanation. Stories that make you question the world you thought you knew. Tonight we are diving deep into 10 true disturbing haunted woods stories. Real accounts from people who experienced the inexplicable, the terrifying, and the unrelenting presence of something that should not exist. These are stories for those brave or foolish enough to listen, stories that may haunt your dreams and make you think twice before stepping into the forest alone. Our first story begins with a man named Ethan. Ethan was an experienced hiker, someone who had trekked countless miles across forests, mountains, and valleys without incident. One autumn evening, he decided to explore a remote patch of woods near the Appalachian foothills, a place rumored among locals to be cursed, though he dismissed the warnings as folklore. As he ventured deeper, the trees grew thicker, the air colder, and the distant sounds of the city disappeared entirely. He reached a clearing and, exhausted, set up camp for the night. At first, everything seemed normal. The crackling fire, the smell of pine, the quiet rustle of nocturnal creatures. But as the moon rose higher, Ethan noticed something peculiar. The shadows surrounding him didn't behave naturally. They stretched and shifted as though alive, and there was a distinct feeling of being watched. Hours passed, and Ethan tried to rationalize the sensation. Perhaps it was just his imagination, the isolation playing tricks on his mind. Then he heard it, a low guttural whisper, almost beneath the wind, calling his name. "Ethan," it said. He froze, heart pounding, scanning the darkness for the source. There was nothing. Yet the voice persisted, closer now, urgent, impossibly soft, yet deafening. Suddenly, he glimpsed movement. A figure standing at the edge of the firelight, impossibly tall, unnaturally thin, with eyes that seemed to pierce through him. Ethan fled, abandoning his gear, stumbling through the undergrowth until he emerged on a familiar trail hours later, breathless and terrified. Locals later confirmed that others had reported similar encounters in that very clearing. The forest, it seemed, was alive in a way no one could understand. Contrast this with the story of a small group of campers, college friends seeking adventure in the dense forests of northern Minnesota. Unlike Ethan, they came armed with skepticism, confidence, and a sense of humor. They laughed at the idea of haunted woods, posting pictures online, mocking local legends. But soon, their laughter faded. One by one, they began hearing strange noises at night. soft footsteps circling their tents, whispering voices, and a persistent scratching on the trees above them. At first, they assumed it was wildlife, but the noises followed them wherever they went. And then, inexplicably, some of their belongings began to vanish. Small items at first, then larger ones. Their disappearance accompanied by an oppressive, suffocating feeling. On the third night, they awoke to find shadowy figures standing just beyond the tent walls, watching silently. They packed up immediately, abandoning the trip. When they returned weeks later with authorities, the forest was empty, as if the terror had been personal to them alone. A reminder that some places have memories that only certain people awaken. Contrast and tension are essential to understanding the nature of these haunted woods. Some encounters are fleeting, brief glimpses of the supernatural. Others are prolonged, psychologically and physically tormenting. Take the case of Marissa, a solo photographer exploring an abandoned logging path in the Pacific Northwest. She was drawn by the allure of capturing mist-shrouded landscapes. But as night fell, her camera began malfunctioning. Images showed movement that hadn't been there. Figures appearing behind trees, faces twisted in agony. At first, she assumed it was a technical glitch, yet the sense of being followed intensified. She described hearing a voice that spoke not words, but emotions. Fear, sorrow, rage, all directed at her. By dawn she had fled, her equipment left behind, convinced that the forest itself had claimed her presence for its own mysterious purposes. Then, there's the story of a father and daughter hiking the remote trails of the Catskills. They had always loved nature, the sense of freedom it provided. But on this particular day, the weather turned abruptly, and a thick fog enveloped the woods. Sounds were muted, and visibility was almost zero. The daughter claimed to see a small hunched figure darting between the trees, always just out of reach. At first, the father dismissed it, chalking it up to imagination. But soon, he too felt a presence, something that didn't belong, something cold and unrelenting. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting toward them, and they both heard the unmistakable sound of someone or something following. By the time they exited the fog and reached safety, both were pale and shaken. They never returned, haunted by the feeling that the forest still remembered them. Perhaps what makes these stories so terrifying is the contrast between the familiar and the unknown. Woods are places of serenity, places to escape, yet in these accounts, that same environment transforms into a predator. The rustle of leaves, normally soothing, becomes a signal of danger. The soft breeze, normally comforting, carries whispered threats, and the trees themselves, silent sentinels by day, twist into watchers and wraiths by night. People who have lived near these forests for decades speak of a sense of dread, an instinctual warning that something is not right, that certain areas are off limits to human eyes. It's this duality, the woods as both refuge and menace, that keeps these stories alive and haunting. Contrast framing extends further when we examine the physical evidence, or lack thereof. Many of these haunted woods incidents leave no tangible proof. Photographs, videos, and recordings often fail to capture the true horror, leaving victims' accounts as the primary evidence. Some say this is because the forest's supernatural elements exist outside conventional understanding, perceptible only to those in its presence. Others speculate that fear itself manifests in physical forms, that the woods amplify the mind's deepest anxieties into something almost tangible. In either case, the line between reality and imagination blurs, creating an experience so vivid it can leave permanent scars on one's psyche. And yet, humans are drawn to the unknown. Despite the terror, many continue to seek out haunted forests, whether for thrill, curiosity, or proof of the unexplained. The contrast here is striking. The very places that threaten our safety and sanity are the same ones that call us back, whispering promises of discovery, adventure, and the chance to witness something extraordinary. This allure is universal, a delicate balance between fear and fascination that keeps these woods alive in stories, legends, and personal experiences. The first 4 accounts we've shared highlight the unpredictable, often personal nature of these encounters, from Ethan's solitary terror to Marissa's camera revelations, from college campers' unnerving group experience to the father and daughter's fog-shrouded encounter. One theme emerges: the haunted woods are selective. They choose who will see, who will hear, and who will leave forever changed. And the common thread? An omnipresent feeling of being watched, of something just beyond comprehension, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As you listen, consider the spaces you've walked alone, the forest paths you've taken at dusk, the quiet corners of nature where the light fades first. The stories we'll explore tonight may seem distant or unbelievable, but they share a common truth. The woods have a life of their own, a memory, a consciousness. They remember every footstep, every intrusion, every moment of fear, and sometimes they respond. Our next story takes place in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, where towering pines blot out the sky and the air hangs heavy with mist. A man named Leonard had always been fascinated by old legends, and one night he decided to test the truth behind a particularly eerie local tale. The story spoke of a figure known only as the Watcher, a shadow that followed travelers who strayed too far from the trail. Leonard, confident in his experience as a hiker and outdoorsman, laughed off the warnings. He arrived at the forest late in the afternoon, the sun low and golden, and began his trek along a path rumored to be haunted. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Birds chirped, squirrels rustled, and the faint smell of damp earth filled the air. But as the shadows lengthened, Leonard noticed subtle signs that something was off. The usual forest sounds seemed muted, as though the life of the woods had recoiled. Twigs snapped behind him, but whenever he turned, nothing was there. The first real sign came when he glimpsed a tall, gaunt figure standing between the trees. Its face was obscured by darkness, but Leonard felt an icy stare pierce his skin. He tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But a deep unease settled in his chest. The watcher, he realized too late, was not a legend born of imagination, but a presence as real as the ground beneath his feet. Contrast this with the experience of a mother and her teenage son exploring a remote woodland in Virginia. Unlike Leonard, they approached the forest with caution, sticking to marked paths and avoiding areas locals whispered about in hushed tones. They were prepared for a peaceful evening hike, the kind that strengthens bonds and soothes the mind. But as the sun set, the woods seemed to close around them. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting and moving in ways that defied physics. The son reported hearing whispers urging him to leave, while the mother felt invisible eyes on her every movement. By the time they returned to their car, both were pale and shaken. Unlike Leonard, who had sought out fear, they had stumbled upon it inadvertently. A reminder that the woods do not discriminate in their haunting. Then there is the story of a young couple camping in the remote forests of New Hampshire. They had chosen the location for its tranquility, a secluded spot where they could escape the chaos of city life. The first night passed peacefully, but on the second, strange things began to occur. The fire flickered unnaturally. Shadows danced against the tent walls in impossible patterns, and faint knocking sounds echoed from the trees surrounding them. At first, they assumed it was wildlife, but the knocks grew louder, rhythmic, almost deliberate. And then came the whispering, a voice that seemed to come from every direction, calling their names in tones that chilled them to the bone. Panicked, they abandoned their campsite, leaving behind belongings and carefully packed supplies. Weeks later, when they returned with authorities, the area was deserted. No footprints, no signs of intrusion, just the forest itself, as if it had swallowed the fear and returned to silence. Contrast is evident in the difference between individual and group experiences. Leonard faced the watcher alone, his fear intensified by isolation, every creak and rustle magnified by solitude. The mother and son experienced the haunting together, their fear amplified by shared perception and the impossibility of rationalizing what they sensed. The young couple faced a haunting that escalated over time, showing that even a fleeting night can stretch into a profound encounter with the unknown. This contrast emphasizes an unsettling truth. Haunted woods do not follow rules. They are unpredictable, shifting with the perceptions, fears, and vulnerabilities of those who enter. Consider the story of Daniel, an avid trail runner who often pushed the limits of endurance in the forests of Maine. One evening, he took a lesser-known path after dark, thinking his speed and agility would protect him from danger. Within an hour, he realized something was following. Footsteps echoed his own, perfectly synchronized yet impossibly soft. Branches snapped in response to his movements, as though the forest itself were alive, mocking his attempt to outrun it. Daniel tried to maintain his pace, but exhaustion and fear slowed him. By the time he emerged near the trailhead, he was convinced he had been chased not by an animal, but by a conscious, watching entity. His friends later confirmed that no one had been on the trails that night. He had been alone. Contrast this again with a group of amateur ghost hunters exploring the forests of West Virginia. Armed with cameras, flashlights, and recording equipment, they approached the haunted area with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. The first hour passed without incident, reinforcing their confidence. But as night deepened, the equipment began to malfunction. Cameras recorded distorted shapes that weren't present in real life. Recorders captured faint, urgent whispers, and lights flickered in ways impossible to explain. The group felt a sudden, oppressive weight pressing down on them, a sensation of being herded by invisible forces. Unlike Daniel, who experienced the haunting individually, the group's fear was collective, each person feeding off the tension of the others, heightening the sense of dread. The haunted woods often operate through contrasts. Light versus dark, known versus unknown, safety versus danger. A well-marked trail becomes a labyrinth when shadows twist and stretch. Familiar paths transform into traps, and ordinary sounds acquire sinister undertones. People who have spent lifetimes near these forests report the same eerie patterns. The sensation of being watched, inexplicable noises, fleeting shadows, and objects that move without explanation. Even those who dismiss superstition cannot deny the primal fear that grips the chest when the woods behave in ways that defy reason. Contrast is also evident in the psychological aftermath. Some emerge with minor unease, a story to tell, a lesson about respect for nature's mysteries. Others carry lasting trauma, recurring nightmares, and an enduring belief that something supernatural exists just beyond perception. The woods are not merely a backdrop. They are active participants in these encounters. They remember footsteps, amplify fear, and respond to intrusion. This awareness transforms ordinary forests into arenas of psychological terror, shaping the experiences of anyone who ventures too close to their hidden heart. Consider the story of an elderly man who had spent decades walking the forests near his hometown in Oregon. One night, he encountered a small shrouded figure moving along the path ahead. He felt no immediate danger, only a profound sense of unease. Over the next few minutes, the figure disappeared and reappeared, always just beyond reach, always observing. The man described the sensation as being looked through rather than at, a perception that seemed to penetrate beyond the physical into the deepest parts of the mind. He survived the encounter, yet it left him shaken, a vivid reminder that the woods retain secrets older and stranger than human understanding. Contrast the experienced hiker with a lost child. Whereas the hiker may recognize danger and have tools to navigate it, the child experiences the forest purely as a place of fear. Stories exist of children wandering into haunted woods, guided by unseen hands or lured by whispering voices. Some return unharmed, forever changed by what they cannot explain. Others vanish, leaving only stories of strange shadows and inexplicable sounds. The woods, impartial and unconcerned with human logic, provide both sanctuary and peril depending on who walks their paths. These accounts share common threads: isolation, inexplicable sounds, shadowy figures, and the unnerving feeling of being watched. They also share contrast, the difference between expectation and reality, confidence and vulnerability, skepticism and fear. This duality is what makes haunted woods terrifying. They are at once familiar and alien, a place of serenity that can become a theater of horror in an instant. And it is within this tension, this balance of contrasts, that these stories take hold, gripping the imagination and refusing to let go. The next tale comes from the shadowy forests of Pennsylvania, where legends tell of the Hollow Man, a figure that moves silently among the trees. A group of college friends decided to spend a weekend camping deep within these woods. Eager for adventure and the thrill of ghost stories come to life. At first, their laughter echoed through the clearing, guitars strummed, and the warmth of the campfire made the night feel safe. But as darkness fell, the forest seemed to shift. The air grew thicker. The wind whispered through the branches in eerie tones, and shadows began to stretch unnaturally across the ground. The first sign that something was wrong came when one of the friends, Emily, noticed a figure watching them from beyond the tree line. It was tall, unnervingly still, and completely black, absorbing the firelight rather than reflecting it. She blinked, and the figure seemed closer, as if it had moved without a sound. Emily tried to warn the others, but they dismissed her fears, assuming it was a trick of the firelight or a large tree. As the night progressed, however, the evidence could no longer be ignored. Footsteps circled the camp in perfect rhythm. Unseen eyes followed their every movement, and whispered voices carried just beyond comprehension. Panic replaced laughter, In a desperate bid to escape, they packed hastily and fled into the darkness. Days later, locals reported that these woods had a history of visitors disappearing or returning, visibly shaken, as though touched by a force beyond human understanding. Contrast this with the experience of a solo traveler named Mark, who ventured into the forests of Vermont in late autumn. Unlike the group, Mark moved silently, carrying minimal gear and trusting his instincts. He stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its windows dark, its door slightly ajar. Curious and unafraid, he stepped inside, only to find the interior furnished as though it had been abandoned mid-use. Plates on the table, chairs slightly askew, and a thick layer of dust disturbed in recent hours. The room seemed empty, yet he felt eyes on him, a silent judgment that crawled beneath his skin. Then came the whispering, faint at first, like wind through cracks in the cabin walls, but unmistakably human, calling his name with intimate knowledge of his fears. Mark fled into the forest, realizing that solitude did not offer protection, but perhaps amplified the sense of being hunted. The contrast between the group and the solo traveler is striking. Together, humans tend to rationalize fear, sharing it in ways that allow for skepticism and humor. Alone, fear becomes intimate, personal, and unavoidable. The haunted woods exploit both conditions, twisting the mind and distorting reality to suit the emotional state of the intruder. Whether in a crowd or in solitude, the forest maintains control, bending perception and heightening anxiety. In the forests of North Carolina, another story unfolded that blurred the line between the natural and the supernatural. A logger named Samuel was returning home after a long day in the woods. Familiar with every bend in the path, every tree and rock, he was confident in his knowledge. But that evening, the forest betrayed him. A low fog rolled in, thickening with each step, muting sound and disorienting him completely. Shapes appeared in the mist, figures too human to be animals, too strange to be entirely real. He heard whispers that seemed to emanate from the fog itself, urging him deeper into the woods. Hours later, he stumbled upon his cabin, exhausted and terrified, convinced he had wandered for miles without noticing. Days later, he found footprints in patterns that made no sense, as though someone or something had been walking in circles around him, orchestrating his confusion. Contrast this with the story of a child's first encounter with haunted woods. A young boy named Liam wandered a forest near his home in Oregon, chasing fireflies at dusk. Unlike Samuel, Liam had no understanding of trails, no survival skills, and no expectation of danger. The woods presented themselves in playful, deceptive ways. Twisting branches, rustling leaves, and shadows that seemed to move independently. Then the whispers began, gentle at first, coaxing him further into the darkness. gradually turning urgent, almost threatening. Hours later, search parties found Liam, unharmed physically, but shaken. His description of the experience, filled with vivid images of shadowy figures and disembodied voices. Unlike Samuel, who faced fear as an adult capable of rational thought, Liam experienced the woods as a realm where imagination and reality blended, where innocence made him more vulnerable to the forest's subtle manipulations. Another account comes from a night hiker named Fiona, exploring the dense forests of Michigan. She was experienced, methodical, and fully prepared for the isolation and darkness. But experience did not inoculate her against fear. On her second night, she noticed strange symbols carved into tree trunks. Symbols that did not resemble any known alphabet or markings. They seemed to glow faintly under her flashlight. Intrigued and unsettled, Fiona followed them deeper into the woods. Each step brought a growing sense of being observed, a prickling on the back of her neck. Eventually, she found a clearing where the symbols formed a circle, and within it, a figure crouched, motionless. When she called out, it vanished instantly, leaving behind only a silence so deep it felt tangible. Even after returning home, the image of the figure remained etched in her mind, haunting dreams and waking thoughts alike. Contrast is again evident in perception and interpretation. Where Fiona saw symbols and a figure, others might dismiss them as natural phenomena or illusions. Where Samuel felt lost and manipulated by fog, others might simply see poor visibility. Haunted woods challenge certainty, creating experiences that resist logical explanation. The fear generated is as much about what the mind fills in as what actually exists. The forest becomes a mirror, reflecting and amplifying internal anxieties, twisting them into a shared reality that is as believable as it is terrifying. Consider the story of a group of amateur photographers in the forests of California. They had come to capture night photography, enchanted by the interplay of moonlight and mist. At first, the images were beautiful, ethereal, almost magical. But when reviewing the photos, they noticed figures, tall, dark, impossible to place, lurking in the backgrounds of their shots. Some images depicted shapes that seemed to follow them, closer with each frame. Their excitement turned to fear as they realized the figures had not appeared in real life, only in the photographs. The forest had left its mark, a record of something unseen, existing in the spaces between observation and reality. The woods are a paradox, inviting yet hostile, familiar yet alien. Contrast appears again in how fear is triggered, by what is present, by what is absent, and by the mind's own projections. Shadows become tangible threats. Whispers become warnings, and the silence itself is oppressive. Those who enter haunted forests encounter a dual reality, one of physical terrain and one of psychological manipulation, each influencing the other in ways that are impossible to fully disentangle. Finally, in the forests of Wisconsin, a story tells of an old ranger named Thomas who had spent decades patrolling trails and guiding hikers. One autumn evening, he noticed a child wandering alone, calling out to no one in particular. When approached, the child vanished before his eyes, leaving only footprints that led in a circle back to the original spot. The ranger, familiar with every trail and path, could not explain the phenomenon. Locals later recounted seeing ghostly figures wandering the woods, children playing alone in shadows, figures that disappeared when approached. The woods had claimed their stories, leaving echoes of fear and wonder in those who survived encounters. The final tale comes from the remote forests of Maine, where the locals speak of the Silent Watcher, an entity said to observe travelers from the treetops, never moving, never speaking, only watching. A family of 4 decided to spend a long weekend hiking these trails, unaware of the tales. Initially, their experience was idyllic. The sun filtered through the dense canopy. Bird song filled the air, and the smell of damp earth was intoxicating. But as evening fell, the forest seemed to close in around them. The shadows grew longer, and an unnatural stillness settled, broken only by the crunch of their own footsteps and the occasional rustle that came from nowhere. Their first encounter occurred near an abandoned ranger station, where they found footprints that did not match any human or known animal. Each set seemed to move closer with every step they took. The family attempted to dismiss it as an animal or a prank, but the sense of being watched grew overwhelming. The father, trying to maintain calm, decided to set up camp before nightfall. But no matter where they pitched their tent, they could feel eyes upon them. That night, a strange tapping on the tent's fabric woke them repeatedly. Each time they looked outside, nothing was there. Yet when they peeked through the openings, shadows shifted unnaturally, avoiding direct view. Sleep was impossible, fear palpable, as if the forest itself was alive, orchestrating a symphony of terror in total silence. Contrast this with the story of an experienced survivalist named Reggie, who entered the same forests weeks later. Reggie was prepared for anything. He carried navigation tools, survival gear, and an intimate knowledge of wilderness survival. Yet even with all his expertise, the haunted woods of Maine proved formidable. As he moved deeper, he began hearing footsteps that did not belong to him, shadows that darted just outside his vision, and whispers that seemed to come from the wind itself. Each attempt to rationalize the phenomena failed. The forest behaved as though it had a consciousness of its own. Reggie realized that the woods were not only a physical space, but a psychological one, adapting to fear and anticipation, feeding off doubt and tension. In the forests of Virginia, there is another account, told by hikers who stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail. The path appeared innocent, but as they ventured deeper, they noticed strange, circular carvings on the trees. The carvings seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, as if alive. They followed the symbols, curious but increasingly uneasy. Hours later, they found themselves at a clearing with a massive tree in the center, its bark twisted unnaturally, and roots forming shapes like limbs reaching out. A presence filled the clearing, a heavy, suffocating pressure that made breathing difficult. When one of the hikers screamed, the sound echoed not in the forest, but seemingly inside their own minds. Panic ensued, and they fled, realizing that the woods had manipulated both space and perception, making the familiar terrain alien and hostile. Contrast again shows how the human mind interacts with the supernatural. For some, fear is externalized, an invasion of reality. For others, it becomes internalized, a battle with one's own psyche. The haunted woods exploit both, ensuring that no traveler leaves unchanged. Even those who dismiss the tales often find themselves hesitant to return, haunted not by evidence, but by the possibility of encounter. In Oregon, a hunter named David shared his story. He had spent years in the wilderness, confident in his ability to navigate forests and handle wild animals. One evening, while tracking deer, he noticed a figure standing motionless between the trees. When he approached, it vanished. Then the sounds began, footsteps following him, leaves rustling, whispers that called out his name. David attempted to confront the figure, only to find empty clearings, footprints that started and stopped abruptly, and broken branches, as if someone or something was observing, mimicking his movements. After hours, exhausted and shaken, he returned to his cabin, only to find shadows moving inside. Though the house was empty, he never returned to those woods alone again. Contrast can also be seen in encounters with groups versus solitary travelers. Groups may experience shared illusions, where collective anxiety amplifies fear, while solitary travelers often face more intense, personalized manifestations of terror. Both experiences are valid, both are terrifying, and both feed into the forest's growing mythology. The woods become a living entity, shifting with each visitor's fears, ensuring no two experiences are alike. In the forests of Washington, a camper named Lisa recounted a different type of encounter. She noticed that her compass spun erratically, failing to point north, and familiar trails looped back on themselves in impossible ways. As night fell, she heard rhythmic tapping, once, twice, thrice, coming from beyond her tent. She stepped outside to investigate, only to find herself surrounded by mist that seemed to move with intention. Shapes coalesced in the fog, tall and impossibly thin, moving as if floating. Lisa's fear heightened, but her rational mind struggled to understand what was happening. When morning came, there was no trace of the mist or figures. Yet she carried the experience in vivid detail, a memory etched with terror and awe. Contrast remains key. In each story, perception and reality are intertwined. The forest's danger is not always physical. Often, it is psychological, emotional, and deeply personal. Shadows, whispers, and shapes are manifestations of the wood's power to unsettle and terrify. Every traveler carries a unique vulnerability. Every step invites uncertainty, and every night spent among the trees magnifies the unknown. Finally, the story of an elderly botanist named Harold in the forests of New Hampshire illustrates the lasting impact of haunted woods. While documenting rare plant species, he encountered a grove of ancient trees, their roots tangled in unnatural patterns, their trunks scarred with markings that glowed faintly in the fading light. He spent hours observing the patterns, only to feel a presence behind him. Turning, he saw nothing. But when he looked back at the trees, he realized the markings had shifted, rearranged into symbols that seemed to convey a message he could not understand. Days later, he discovered that other researchers had reported similar phenomena, yet none could explain them. The forest had a language, a consciousness, a memory, and it left its mark on all who dared enter. As these stories demonstrate, haunted woods are not merely settings for ghost tales. They are active participants in the narrative of fear. Whether in Maine, Oregon, Pennsylvania, or New Hampshire, the experiences share common threads. Shadows that defy explanation, whispers that chill the soul, and an overwhelming sense that the forest is aware. Travelers confront not only the wilderness, but also the unknown, and the boundaries between reality and imagination blur. Each tale leaves a lasting impression, an echo of fear that persists long after the forest has been left behind. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these stories is that they are not isolated. Across continents, forests have been described as haunted, bewitched, or alive with unseen entities. The phenomenon transcends culture and geography, suggesting a universal human response to the primal fear of the unknown, amplified by isolation, darkness, and the whisper of ancient trees. In this way, haunted woods are mirrors, reflecting the deepest fears of those who enter, shaping experiences that linger, morph, and return in dreams. As you lie in bed tonight, imagine the forest beyond your window, the rustle of leaves, the faint snap of a twig, the shadows that stretch just beyond perception. Remember that the woods are patient, observing silently, ready to ensnare the imagination of anyone who dares enter. For those who have ventured, the memory of haunted forests is indelible, a reminder that nature, in its oldest and quietest forms, holds mysteries beyond human comprehension. Perhaps tomorrow, you may walk among trees and feel a chill that cannot be explained, a whisper that cannot be traced, and understand, in a subtle but profound way, the stories of the haunted woods.